Just very quickly going to go through some slightly technical things so that the rest of the webinar is a little easy on everyone. So this is just I mean it is basically what you shared. Before every INC, there is a document that the INC Secretariat puts together. So after INC 1, the Secretariat put together an options for elements paper, which is the different elements that would be there in the treaty, and different options in it, which could be the foundation for the negotiations in INC2. From which we hope that at the end of INC2, we would actually have a zero draft. But because we lost 2.5 days to rules of procedure fights, we didn't have a zero draft at the end of it, but we had a mandate for zero draft, and chair of the INC was asked to work on this zero draft and send it in advance of INC3, which then got discussed in INC3. The other thing that happened in the INC2 is that some member countries felt that elements like principal scope and a couple of others were missing in the options for elements paper, and that there should be a separate meeting for that in INC3, or rather before INC3, to discuss that. And member states said that they would like to make submissions to these missing elements, which then the chair compiled as a synthesis report. So basically, we have therefore in INC3, we had the discussion on the zero draft, which has 13 elements. And this is part two. Part one was objectives. Part two was the elements in zero draft. And it's like the resolution 514 says, it is plastic pollution across the life cycle. So it starts from primary plastic polymers and goes right up till just transition and transparency, traceability, monitoring and reporting, labeling. The part three of the zero draft was on financing, capacity building, technical assistance, and technology. Part four was basically the means of implementation, which was national action plans, implementation compliance, and a host of elements that are needed for the implementation of the treaty of the upcoming treaty itself. So these were the four parts that were part of the zero draft. What some sections in the zero draft were placeholders, which meant that they would be added in after INC3 once the discussion had happened. Part one would have preamble, definitions, principles, and scope. And part five would have institutional arrangements, which is what would be the governing body, subsidiary body, and where the secretariat would be located, etc. The way the negotiations in INC3 happened is there were plenaries, opening, mid, and closing. But the large part of INC3 was spent in contact groups. Contact group one spoke of, negotiated the zero drafts part one and two. Contact group two was the zero drafts part 3 and 4. And contact group three discussed the synthesis document. It's basically these elements which are in part one of the placeholder text. So it discussed preamble, definitions, principles, and scope. So this was the way work was actually organized in the INC during the INC3. For those who might not be familiar, plenaries are recorded and live streamed on YouTube. These can be quoted and things like that. But contact group sessions are under Chatham House rules, so we can't say who said what. We can't put things on social media. Having said that, all the contact groups, the countries made submissions to the secretariat based on whatever they were speaking. So any oral submission was followed by a written submission. Because this was not a text negotiation, as they call it. It's not like they projected the text and started negotiating on the text, but were negotiating what was in the zero draft. The zero draft, by the way, comprised of each element had three options: option 1, 2, and 3, with the option 1 being the most ambitious and option 3 being the least ambitious of whatever options were offered. The contact groups basically spent time with each country saying which options they were supporting, and also suggested alternate texts for each of these options. So it's not like they said option 1, we stand with option 1, or we stand with option 2. It was not a voting, but they would say we go with option 2 and propose this alternate text or this additional text. So what happened through the contact groups was that if there were three options, now we had three options, and with each country adding their own text to each of those options. And so what we had at the end of INC3 was a really bloated document. The Secretariat says that they will share the revised zero draft by the end of this month. But what we have is even just contact group ones, which is part 1 and 2. That document itself was a 73-page document. What we started, the zero draft original, which had all the parts, had actually just 32 or 36 pages. So we are seeing that all four had 32 to 36 pages, while now we have just two parts having all more than, possibly around 73 pages. So we have a very, very bloated zero draft. Instead of fine tuning and coming down and agreeing on options, what happened was people were putting in more and more, text and options to what was already present. Um, the other thing, that happened, thanks, Siddharth. The other thing that happened was that intersessional work is very, very important in these treaties, because uh, you can negotiate only for, those 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 days. That's when the actual negotiations happen. But if you want to know if you want to deep dive into something, if you want more information or something, then having intersessional work is critical. And so each of these three contact groups proposed, topics for intersessional work, and the entire membership was supposed to actually, kind of come to an agreement on the intersessional work between 3 and 4, but they were unable to come to a conclusion. There were, a couple of sticky points which we can look at later. So we end up now with no agreement for a mandate for intersessional work either. So, I mean, if we were to say in very simple words, what was the outcome of INC through 3? It's actually nothing. It was just more and more options, more and more creating much more layered difficulty for INC4, when the intention was to do, text by text. So, you would agree on a few options, the text would be projected, and the countries would negotiate on each of the words that were there. So we seem far away from that, and with no intersessional work either mandated. Our concern, finally, before I get into the India's position, our concern finally is that some countries who've been resisting the treaty itself, or a strong treaty itself, might use UNIA 6, which is going to be held in end of February in Nairobi, to either dilute the scope or the legally binding nature or something of it. So that's, and the next INC4 is in April, and we're worried that before INC4 there might be some attempts to actually dilute and water down the scope of the instrument itself. So this is the broader context that we're in, and we'll come now to specific things that happened during the negotiations. So just to give context again to participants who are here who might not be familiar with the Global Plastics Treaty, and I do see some people over here, is that um, right from INC2, we see some kind of a formation or an informal grouping of some countries who actually resisted the rules of procedure, or very simply put, wanted consensus over any kind of voting. And these groups, ironically maybe, but they were all either the oil producing and or petrochemical producing countries. So, and of course, they are in a minority. They're not more than maybe 15, 16, 20 at best, even if they mobilize their allies. But, and they were the ones who were very vocal, very vociferous, almost held the room to ransom for 2.5 days, and didn't want any negotiation to proceed. And it's these same countries who, really are making it very difficult for a strong global plastics treaty. Who are these countries? These are the Gulf countries. These are the Iran, Iraq, uh, India was also part of that grouping in INC2, China, Russia, Brazil, and of course the six GCC countries, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So, and then of course their allies, in terms of Cuba, in terms of Vietnam, and others. So we see similarly in this INC3 as well. What we see is that uh, you know. Uh, Iran inadvertently announced something called the like-minded like-minded groups of countries, gave it a name, Global Coalition for Sustainable Plastics, and they read out names like Russian Federation, Bahrain, China, Cuba, and many more. So they were kind of, saying that here is a group of countries which is now which is coming together. Very clearly, these were the group of countries who have generally a low ambition. On the other hand, we're seeing that from before even INC1, we have a coalition of high ambition coalition, as they call it, which is chaired by Norway and Rwanda, and which has, if I'm not mistaken, some about 63 odd countries there, which is, by the way, 36% of the membership. So it's a decent sized grouping. However, we also have UAE and Japan in there who are not particularly high ambition. Nevertheless, there is a high ambition coalition that has existed before INC1. And it almost looks like now there's this attempt to group the low ambition coalition together to push back. After Iran made this announcement inadvertently on the preparatory meeting, it never came up again. So they didn't say like-minded countries. They didn't, refer back to the grouping. None of the countries validated whether they were part of it or not. But having said that, in a sense, they named something that was already happening, which is the oil and petrochemical countries were forming a group to push back on the treaty. And India is very much a part of this low ambition, unfortunately, this very extremely low ambition group. So we have the question of the like-minded countries. The question is, or the other part of what happened this time was conflict of interest, where one of the organizations actually looked at the provisional list of participants that had been provided by UNEP, and saw a massive increase in participation of the industry. Uh, all of us are observers, so you might be CSO, you might be industry, but you're all clubbed as observers, and this is based on self-disclosure. So the participant list comes with your affiliation, and based on that, we identified about 140 odd people within the observer group who were there, and these were industry lobbies. Coming to India, I don't want to focus too much on the global, but coming to India, we know that there was a member from Reliance Industries Limited. There were members from Plast India Foundation. There were members from the Chemical and Petrochemical Manufacturing Association of India, and a couple of recyclers. But definitely, the petrochemical industry was there in not large numbers, but in strong numbers. So that's very clear. And some of them were parts of member delegations, not of India, but of other countries. So that's something very, very important to note, because if you're part of a member delegation, you have access to spaces, documents, conversations, which you wouldn't otherwise have if you were merely an observer. And your ability to influence the process is a lot higher. Our friends from the Indian delegation, the government delegation, and the industry, by the way, also stayed in the same hotel. So we can imagine what breakfast conversations might have, been like. So coming to some of the upstream elements, and then Siddharth will deal with the more of the downstream part of it. Upstream and downstream are upstream is where the oil and gas is extracted and petrochemicals are made. The midstream is where the big fast-moving consumer goods and other consumers of plastics use and put out the plastics in the environment. And downstream is really the managing of all that. So on the question of primary plastic polymers, our country, so just to say that the three contact groups made hundreds, I mean, from what I remember now, which could even be wrong, more than 300 or 400 submissions were made across these three contact groups. So by member states. So that's one thing to remember. It was definitely highly debated and very action oriented kind of a negotiation. On the question of primary plastic polymers, which is plastics are made from polymers, which is made after refining oil or gas or coal, but in India it's mostly oil. Is that India said that there should be absolutely no provision on primary plastic polymers, and this should be reflected in the zero draft. So they said plastic polymers should not come under the purview of this treaty at all. Keep it out. It has nothing to do with plastics. Very clearly, the treaty itself is about plastic pollution across the life cycle. They tried to argue that polymers are not part of the life cycle. After hearing what happened in Saudi, about there being no scientific evidence for the need to push back, to, reduce our dependency on oil and gas. It reminded me of a lot of conversations that happened even in INC3, where there was a lot of unscientific conversations as well going on. How could polymers not be part of the life cycle if plastics don't exist, if polymers don't exist? So that was one area of concern. And again, we are very clearly seeing whose voice is being represented when that submission is made. When it comes to chemicals and polymers of concern, India said that there should be national circumstances, and this is something that India has in all its right from whether it's financing, all the provisions. They say national circumstances and national action plan. So let's remember that this is a internationally or a global legally binding treaty. So while there is a need for national action plans to ensure nations are following what is globally mandated, the mandate is global and the mandate is legally binding. But a massive attempt to scuttle that by pushing for national action plans, national circumstances, common but differentiated responsibilities, and developing nations. I think these are the four. If I were to identify four words that is a favorite of these countries, including especially India, it is these. So saying that we will do what is required as per our national circumstance. So there goes the global context out, that we will only do as per national action plans, or we will only do it if the financing is available, then we will be obliged to stand with the obligation. So there goes out the legally binding part of it. Common but differentiated responsibilities is, while it's novel, while it was very progressive for its times, during the Rio Declaration, it has been corrupted and abused only as a way to pollute more. So that is another thing that India has constantly done. And finally, when it comes to chemicals and polymers of concern, they kept referring back to Stockholm and Rotterdam conventions, which say that they covered this issue already. Stockholm Convention looks at persistent organic pollutants, and the Rotterdam Convention looks at the trade of hazardous chemicals. Some things we have to remember: not all member countries are signatories to these conventions. Also, these are not legally binding conventions. Finally, if you have one treaty, then the governance of that treaty needs to remain within that treaty. You can't have another treaty governing, this treaty. Then it's not a ready to implement, treaty. And none of those treaties have stopped any other treaty from, it's not like it's a jurisdiction issue. It's not like Stockholm Convention says nobody else can, govern POPs. So that's something that India constantly used, whether it was for chemicals of concern or for trade. In trade, there are two parts, which is waste trade and trade of chemicals and polymers and other raw materials. And they kept saying that, of course, waste trade, and possibly Siddharth will look at it, is covered by other treaties, but the question of trade in general is covered by the WTO, and therefore it should not be touched. Again, we know that the problems with the WTO, we know the politics mired around WTO, and even in questions of transparency and traceability, the Indian government, representatives constantly invoked, WTO and the technical barriers to trade that they already exist, or saying that there should be no technical barriers to trade, and therefore transparency can be a technical barrier, and therefore should not be covered, within this treaty. So using other treaties to undermine this treaty is something that India constantly kept doing. Um, on the question of avoidable plastics, it's amazing they invoke science whenever they wish. In when it comes to avoidable plastics, they said that that avoidable plastic products, including short-lived and single-use plastic products, identified based on science-based criteria. So at home, they're telling us we have a strong plastic waste management rules. We have these 19 SUPs banned, and then they've gone, they go to a treaty and say, including short-lived and single-use plastics should be identified using scientific criteria. But the scientific criteria that polymers are the base or the foundation of plastics, that plastics can't exist if polymers don't exist, is not something that they want to consider science or act on that. Um, Finally, coming to the question of financing, there was very strong provisions on taxing polluters, which India absolutely said that. I'd like to read that. It's very interesting. These are just from submissions that they made. These are all available online, in fact. They say that the Indian delegation does not agree with so-and-so paragraph, which mentions the levy about plastic pollution fee. This provision implies that all plastic polymer produced leads to pollution, while much of plastic polymer is used in useful plastic products. So they don't even want to acknowledge. Of course, it might be used in useful plastic products. Our MRI machines, of course, have plastic, and we will still possibly continue using plastic. But to do a whataboutery in terms of it is useful and therefore it is not polluting makes no sense, to the logical or the rational, mind. So they don't want any provision which acknowledges that polymers are a problem. They're part of the problem. They contribute to the pollution. Finally, coming to the question of emissions across, I just make two more points and stop. Coming to the point of emissions and releases across the plastic life cycle, again here there's an attempt to undermine plastic life cycle by saying that I mean, we should take necessary measures to regulate emissions and releases of plastics, including microplastics across the life cycle, wishing a vagueness of life cycle, while the zero draft has a far sharper and a far stringent, provision of saying, including plastic polymers. So wherever there's plastic polymers, I mean, they would like to just white out that entire section completely. The last point that I would like to make is on again on existing plastic pollution is the question of reparation and remediation. Just transition is there and it's brilliant, and I see Nalini and others here who will say that it's a weak provision for just transition. We agree it needs to be far more strong. Informal workers, waste pickers are not mentioned. They need to be absolutely specifically mentioned and strengthened. Along with that, reparation, remediation of those affected upstream, is something that's absolutely missing. It was missing in the options for elements paper. It's missing even now. So what we're seeing, and if I may be, bold enough to say so here, is that while in India they're telling us that oh, the other thing on financing they don't want is also on uh, decreasing financial flows from all domestic, international, public, and private sources towards projects that result in emissions and releases to the environment from plastic. So they want more and more money. So they don't want any curbing of investment in in industry, which is inherently what is considered petrochemicals are considered a hard to abate sector, because there are two levels of pollution. One is the energy that's going into it and the emissions from the refining itself. And so it's hard to considered a hard to abate sector, and they do not want any provisions of curbing any investments in these. So what we're seeing over here is that while on the one hand, India here tells us that we are, leaders in plastic management. We have Swachh Bharat Mission. We have, SUP bans and all of that. We see that there is no money where the mouth is when it comes to the upstream part. So the question again, a very logical mind would ask is if you're going to produce more and more polymers, where is it going to go if you're really meaning to curb your, downstream? Is a question, that I have from the upstream to the country's representatives. And also that while we are told here China apps to be banned, and some countries and Muslims are are completely demonized in our country, you have India siding along and plotting, not just siding, but scheming and plotting with the Gulf countries, with China, aligning with each other. I think they just got a little smart about it and didn't mention each other in INC3. In INC2, they kept referring. China would say like India, India would say like China, India would say like Saudi Arabia. So there was a lot of camaraderie going on publicly. This time it was not as public, but the words were echoing with with each other, and also echoing with what the conversation that we had with the industry representatives. It felt like you close your eyes and it's really the Indian delegation or the industry representatives talking. You wouldn't know really the difference between the two. So that's what happened from an upstream point of view. It is a very big matter of concern, given that the Reliance Industries Limited is the biggest petrochemical or polymer producer in our country. They produce 42% of LDPE. Sorry, the sole producers of LDPE, 42% of commodity plastics. We have the Adani Group coming into coal to PVC with their plant in Mundra being having got the environmental clearance. So if one were to kind of see where the stars are and how they're aligning, it's a serious matter of concern. India undermining, the plastic treaty itself, want to relegate it to a waste management document, which again would only have national plans and um, no legally binding provision. So this is my take from the upstream point of view, and I'm sorry if I've overshot, Prakash, and I'm handing it back to you. Thanks. May I say one last thing? So I realize that I'm ending on a very somber note, but there is the Hybridation Coalition. They are, if not 36, at least 30 or 32 countries who are pushing back. You have the African group, which is taking extremely progressive positions, even upstream Rwanda and Senegal. I think they show a lot of bravery in that room when they push back on big, populous countries like ours. And you have the Pacific Island, developing states who are small, tiny countries but who not only make the most eloquent speeches, but they're also largely all women delegations, and actually a massive inspiration because they are the ones who are facing the climate crisis in its worst way. But they also have the challenge of needing some things because they don't produce too much. So import for them is big, and import does come in plastic. So while that is, it's not so simple. It's not so simple that we're a small island, so we don't want plastics. It's not as simplistic as that. It's far more complicated. But you find at least these three groupings standing up and pushing back on a very very powerful onslaught for resistance to upstream measures. Thanks.
I'll try to kind of uh, take it up from where Swati left. Basically, she talked about the upstream part, or the provisions in the zero draft that address the upstream of plastic pollution. I'll try and talk about the interventions that India made, both the interventions and the which were the written submissions which were also uploaded on the INC page, mostly around the midstream and the downstream part of the plastic pollution. And just to add to what kind of Swati was sharing, I was day before yesterday, I was going through a report that is being sold at a rate of almost $3,000. It's by a consultancy known as Global Data, and they've released that some numbers that uh, about roughly about 1,500 petrochemical plants are going to be kind of started from between now and 2027. And India will be home to about 280 of them, which means India's contribution to this petrochemical space is roughly about 19%. And China happens to be the biggest with almost 30% of the share. So these two countries combined will have half of the petrochemical refineries that we are going to have in the next 4 years or so. Uh, uh, Now coming to the midstream part of it, so like Swati shared, we are mostly focusing on the substantial part, which was covered in the part two. So under midstream, we have product design, reduce, reuse, refill. We have alternatives to plastic, and in the downstream, we have mostly focusing on EPR and waste management. So if you look at the midstream provisions, and there's a lot of overlap. If you actually look at the midstream downstream part of the zero draft and kind of tally it with the national regulations that we have in the country, you see a lot of overlap in terms of the provisions, but you also see different positions by the government of India on the same issue. So something that is being kind of promoted and propagated in the country, saying that this is what we have to do on an international stage. We're saying that this is something that we do not agree to. one if I start with product design, which is kind of, if I'm not wrong, it's kind of the fifth provision in the second part of the zero draft. So the text that you will see in red is something that India has disagreed to do, and the one that you see in the black is something that they are ready to kind of accept and move ahead. So in product design, we see that the part which says that we have to reduce the use of plastics across the value chain is something that was not agreed by India, and this is also kind of aligning to what Swati shared. So any provision which talks about either reduction in polymer production, reduction in use of polymers, or any even incorporation of recycled content, we'll just have a look at it as we move ahead. So anything that reduces the use of primary polymers to make new products is something that India has not really agreed to. However, in product design, they've agreed to increase safety, durability, reusability, transparency, etc. But as Swati said, everything is strictly uh, uh, kind of has to be done through a national approach and not really, a legally binding, which may result in some punitive measures. In fact, at least in a couple of interventions and the submissions that the Indian delegation made, they have mentioned that we do not want any punitive measures, which essentially mean they want a voluntary driven treaty. Uh, in reduce, reuse, and refill, again, India has said that they've not really agreed to minimum reduction and reuse or refill targets with timelines, but they've said that when the conference of party happens, so we can have certain targets when we meet for the second conference of parties of this treaty. And again, stress was kind of put on the measures being voluntary and not really legally binding. In terms of use of recycled plastic, uh, India did not agree to plastic products containing minimum. So they expressed um, not use or not using the word contain. Now, this is also very important because if you actually look at it, so the word they prefer over contain is to achieve minimum recycled content and not a product containing minimum recycled content, which also means that uh, there would be a market that would be created because of the EPR regime that we have in the country, wherein recycled plastic, the amount of plastic that is being procured by a certain entity who is into the business of manufacturing products, that they are ready to accept, but they are not really ready to accept that every product that, even if they have uh, non-food grade application uses, would use recycled content. And that's how we also see the use of the term appropriate plastic, because we also have a rule in the country where recycled plastic cannot be used for food grade applications. Earlier, it was much more stronger, but now basically the Ministry of Environment and Forest Climate Change has passed on the buck to the FSSAI. So FSSAI can decide at any point whether or not a recycled plastic can be used for food grade applications for packaging and storage. So and apart from that, if you also look at it, we don't really have a you know a technology which can actually tell you uh, the amount of recycled plastic that a product contains. So any claim, if a product packaging claims that I'm made out of 100% recycled plastic, it's practically impossible to kind of uh, determine uh, if that claim is correct or not. So that's also a technical challenge. In terms of alternative plastic, if you actually look at this, this was actually surprising to me. But If you actually look at it, we do have a single-use plastic ban in the country, however small or however bad it is being implemented, but we do have something on paper. Uh, but the Indian government has kind of disagreed to use economic instruments to promote alternatives. Now, what this means is basically they are not in favor of, uh, you know, maybe having a tax system where a plastic alternative product would be taxed at a lesser amount as compared to a plastic product itself. So, no subsidies offered to any alternative market, and no tax rebates provided to, and we still want to kind of ban the 19 single-use plastic items and move towards alternative, but we don't really want that alternative market to become kind of competitive enough or competent enough to even come closer to the price points of the plastic market itself. So that's one thing that was quite surprising. But yeah, again, they've agreed to alternatives to plastic. They have to be safe, they have to sustainable. And when we say sustainable, this idea of sustainability has actually been used in the wrong sense. Because a lot of times we heard arguments in the room saying that plastics are sustainable if you actually look at it from the emissions point of view, and from the life cycle point of view. But what we should actually be looking at is or what we need to kind of question the industry or even the government for that matter is, do we exactly know, or are we on the same page in terms of where does the life cycle start from? I think that's the disagreement that we have as of now. And in both these provisions, India did mention that India will need finance and technology transfer to kind of move ahead with both of these provisions. In the downstream provisions, we have extended producer responsibility. As you can see, they've adopted the text, but they've eliminated the use of certain words. One word that they've eliminated is incentivize increased recyclability. So any product that is potentially highly recyclable uh, as compared to a different plastic product should not be incentivized, which essentially means that it essentially means that we don't really want newer products which have a high recyclability index to kind of enter into the market, or at least have an edge in terms of the price at which they are offered in the Indian market. And they've also asked for the words or the phrases life cycle throughout the life cycle and across international supply chains to be removed from the text under the provisions of EPR. And in waste management, it was again a very basic thing that India has disagreed to, and that is the removal of the word waste hierarchy, which is a universally accepted concept. It's in fact this is the principle on which all the waste management exercises have to happen. In fact, India's policy right from 2000 has been flawed. It has been doing exactly opposite of what the waste hierarchy uh, demands. Few Because right now what we are doing is we give preference to incineration technologies over recycling. And we are definitely not talking about reduce. We are not talking about reuse enough, and we are definitely not talking about reduce.
What are street vendors thinking about these things? I would just like to give a basic introduction for the organization. National Hawker Federation is a nationwide, India-wide federation of unions of street vendors, where we are like in every state we have a presence of street vendors, and we are mostly working for an implementation of the act which came in 2014, which is the Street Vendors Act, which is a very people-friendly piece of legislation mostly. And in that, we have started focusing on the plastic issue because of the single-use plastic ban. Because the single-use plastic ban, when it came, they actually went after street vendors. Uh, the implementation sort of happened for the small shops and street vendors. Nobody else was really affected as such by sort of the enforcement part of it. Like when the ban came, and even before the national ban came, certain states had already implemented you know, the notification that came from central government that we are coming up with such a ban. So certain states had already in their own states passed a ban on single-use plastics. And in that, they went after street vendors saying that, this is where the polythene bags are being sold from, etc., etc. So street vendors actually got the brunt of the issue while they had no control over it actually. So our position in this is that the producers who are producing the plastic, the people, the companies that are making it are responsible for this pollution. Are not We are not responsible. Street vendors are doing uh, a daily wage kind of business. It's a daily hand to mouth situation for most street vendors, that if they don't do business for 3 or 4 days, they will be in trouble. So for that kind of public, uh, to say that the focus of this pollution and to put the blame, and usually for many different things including traffic, street vendors are a go-to scapegoat for government. And it's quite ridiculous. So this is the background of how the National Hawker Federation came into this conversation and the plastics treaty conversation. On what happened right now in the INC is quite against what we are thinking, in the sense like it is kind of disheartening to see. But from the start, we had a conversation where we were saying keep the polluters out of the conversation, like the producers and people who are coming in, they should not be part of this conversation, because they will definitely be doing what they have done this time. Like they will, the oil producing countries or countries are there, but the especially the industry standard people, like the FMCG, we like most street vendors sell a lot of items which you can go to a vendor and you can see all these items. They're all packed in this single use plastic. The FMCG consumer goods people, the companies are like Nestle, the chocolate company Perfetti, Coca-Cola, all of these people, which is products sold by street vendors also, are all coming into these packages which are not banned. During the ban, they gave a logic that what was the law? The ones that are littering a lot. The products that will be banned would be the ones that are littering more, but are not as a problem, are not very essential products. Those products will be banned. And in that ban, there was not a single product that was made by FMCG. As a matter of fact, there is a statement from the industry leaders that most of our products are not affected by this ban, because it is not, it is their products are marked as essential products. So whose products were affected? It was the small industry whose products street vendors were selling, and the packaging that street vendors were using for our everyday vegetables, fruits, etc. And the onus came on the street vendors that you have to now change the market. Street vendors have to change consumer behavior. Otherwise, the municipality people would come onto the street vendors stalls and fine them left, right, and center whatever they wanted. It was, the fines ranged from 200 to 2000 rupees on local realities. They would find whatever the hell they wanted to find. And COVID became the best excuse for that. During COVID times, they came and uh, came to vendors to use plastic because at that time, even though single-use banned, like for example, single-use plastics were banned in Gujarat, the the tea stall people were told to use the plastic cups or paper cups and were being fined for glass cups. So the realities on ground for street vendors are very multiple and like very complicated and very local centric. But overall, we can say that the single-use plastic ban the brunt of that ban was faced by street vendors. And so with this kind of negotiations going on, we are not seeing a hope for us. We demand that a stringent regulation. What Swati was mentioning earlier, that how we started this conversation in the GPT, and that is completely being lost. At that time, we were very hopeful that especially a one where a legally binding treaty would come up. What right now both the speakers said, that is coming out to be like again it will be on national realities, and if it's on national realities, it will not be done here in India, because we are clearly seeing that Reliance is a major producer, Adani is a major producer, and the government is not uh, touching that. Is very friendly with them and is not going to touch that part of things. The plastic that was banned at this time, you see, सबसे the important one, the thailis. They focused on the carry bags a lot, and then they said that X GSM is not allowed. Microns, sorry, the GSM is the paper. Microns are not allowed, so this much microns is allowed, and there is no logic for that also. But they came to street vendors, they looked at the bags and they said, this is not 70, this is not 100 microns. They decided on the spot. What they actually created for street vendors was a new type of gundagardi, a hooliganism from municipalities, where again with one more reason, already haftabazi and all this extortion is happening on ground for street vendors despite the law. Now the new reason came for street vendors to pay the municipality and other authorities. So, and that side, looking at what is happening in INC3, we are quite disheartened, hoping that some kind of solution will come better by the next negotiation. But we are really, our stand on that is coming back to the conversation of a just transition, which is very important for us in the whole thing, where across the plastic cycle, we would want there is waste pickers as well as there's many other people, but even street vendors are a huge part. I forgot to give you the number of street vendors in India. There are 4 crore street vendors in India. So that's not a small group at all. Across the country, 4 crore street vendors, and if you consider the families, then there are 20 crore people their livelihood depending on street vending. So it's a huge group of people who are depending on this kind of on street vending, and that is why street vending part and plastic connection is very important, that it's going to affect the lives of many people. It's already affecting. So that is where we stand on certain things. Lastly, I would like to say that what we have seen is reuse is working best. For example, 20-30 years ago, reuse was not like plastic was not a reality for street vendors. Most of the stuff you would get was in like juice in kaach ka glass, tea in kaach ka glass. Food would be served in steel plates or plates that were washed later. So what we need from the government and to come up in the global plastic city is that a promise, a real promise, time bound promise that they will invest in infrastructure to enable reuse for street vendors and other groups as well. But specifically for that, we are asking for them to invest in infrastructure that creates enables reuse, similar to what a bus system or a local system that we have in Mumbai or metro system, that we would want the government to invest and facilitate reuse so that we don't need these plastic products. That is what our one of the core demand is. And for whatever pollution is happening, we are also on the butt end, street vendors are also on the butt end of littering charges. Every now and then municipality authorities come and they're like, oh my God, look at this kachra next to you. And then they fine the street vendor for the kachra also, for the littering and the garbage. That garbage and littering is actually produced by the companies who produce the product, whatever they are selling. And then customers throw away. Street vendors don't really have the bandwidth to tell the customers that, oh, please put it in the dustbin. They do tell that, but if they don't do, they just clean it up after, when they close shop, and they clean it up before they start the shop. That's a regular practice. So there are many sides to this conversation, and we would hold accountable only the FMCG companies, mostly the companies that are producing these kind of sachets and multi-layered plastics, and then we get blamed for whatever littering is happening. That is happening because this is the design of the product. It's not happening because sellers are doing it. They are just traders. Street vendors are just traders in the system. So that is one key point that I wanted to make. And that as an alternative, the Global Plastics Treaty must have focus on alternatives. And for that, I'll reiterate that reuse as an alternative. Uh, Reduce if possible, yes, sure. But reuse as an alternative where it emphasizes that this will be done. And there is a concrete plan for that. So that is something that we could demand and work on before the next INC comes.
So like Occurs, we are the one fisher peoples living on the coastline are one of they blame us for putting the plastics into the ocean. That's what the entire plastic littering or marine litter debate that's going around us for the past, I say it starts for past 5 years. Suddenly people jumping into marine littering, ocean littering, marine littering policy, ocean littering policies, and trying to say that fishers are being targeted for this using ghost nets. They used to call us ghost nets. IUU fishing, illegal untreated nets, and so on. There are many treaties on this, you might be knowing. So I learned many things from this about this INC debates, which Swati was been sharing. One of the INC themes she was saying it's about waste management. The waste management, there is a word, there is part A and part B, and one is fishing gear. It talks about fishing gear. So fishing gear in the sense, so they targets on this. That's what the marine, as I said, the marine plastics. You would have seen when you put marine litter itself, you can see a tortoise with the nylon nets. You can see a seagull with nylon nets and everything with the nylon nets. So it is like that. It is netted by the fishes, but the picture shows like that. But if you and you can also see a huge whale. The body is full of microplastics. So that's what this arena of the region portrayed, and it is the blame is more on fisher peoples. But the point here is that I want to narrate how this happened and why it has happened, and also see that who is doing now this plastic littering and other things, whether it will solve the issue of plastics or the marine littering or the waste management, whether it will solve or it will aggravate. So that's what I want to share from my side. Seeing this, usually 60s, I'm saying before independence, fishers are using. I will say a little history of how it has come. Fishers use biodegradable fishing gears. It is made of thread. Mended by fisher women, and it is used by fishers. They go in catamaran made of wood. They go in catamaran, and they have this cotton thread nets, and they can't catch more also. They can't catch more because it is cotton thread. When you put the cotton thread in the net in the sea, it will also wet and it becomes weight. So you can't catch more. If you catch more, the net will also be torn off. So they will lose their catch. So it's a biodegradable. It's a net biodegradable fishing gear, and they bring home. Entire activity of the fish net is used by the women. Women used to mend. And so post 90s, post 50s, all of you know that the modernization, after the freedom, the modernization of fisheries has started, the blue revolution. Many talks about green revolution, but blue revolution started after independence, and they brought this modernized fishing gears brought by Norway. Basically, it is Norway. Norway who brought modernization of fishing gears, modernization of the fishing crabs to get more and more protection, to get more and more yield from the fish, and a complete in a span period of 5 years, the complete demand has been out of the fishing sector because everything is nylon nets, synthetic nylon nets came from the machines. There were struggles in Tamil Nadu against promoting these nylon nets, and Norway has promoted, and it is from subsidies nets, and it has come. And gradually, there were protests, and but it didn't fail because nylon nets has been promoted and promoted and promoted. Now nylon have stabilized in 1980s, but this is promoted by Norway, UNDP, FAO, Bay of Bengal program. There are many programs who promoted this nylon nets, basically the nylon synthetic nets. Then the craft also, they started fiber renewed plastic boats, FRB boats. After tsunami, late 90s, 2004, everywhere it is plastic renewed boats. So the plastic fiber FRB we call it plastic fiber plastic renewed. It's also made up of this nylon polymers. So this is how plastic entered into the fishing sector. So now these nets, when we catch the fish, if the net is there, nylon nets has been sometimes it torn, it is left in the sea and it becomes ghost net. But these ghost nets are bought from different corporate companies. Garber, there are many multinational or transnational companies corporates into it who promoted here through free trade agreements. That's a different story. But this the net abundant net in the sea becomes the ghost net for them. But it is not a ghost net. The ghost has many names from by the state, and it is subsidized nets. But now after these debates in the past years, Norway went after 1950 because India became very good in fisheries, and they went. Now Norway has been called back for marine plastic littering. They have come back to take their nets back. So who promoted this? Norway. Now Norway has gotten back to do marine littering. It's a joint ocean dialogue within India and Norway to litter marine. Nobody talks about who brought this plastics into the sector through fishing gears, modernization of it's waste management. It is written fishing gears. But who brought this to this nation is this people. Now they came back to take their net. But not only they are doing that, they are going to explore on the seabeds, marine spatial planning, and to do all these activities to understand the seabed. They have research vessels. They are scanning the seabeds. One is plastic littering, and one is developing marine spatial planning. Which department is doing it? Ministry of Earth Science. They have a deep ocean mission to take out not only marine litter. The name of marine litter is one of these things, and the other minerals inside the sea. Everybody knows about Chandrayaan, but there is Samudrayaan who is also in the sea. It is launched on the 10 days back after that. And there is a vessel called Samudra Parihari. It's a Coast Guard vessel. It is for pollution vessel, it is called, for littering, for the Asian countries. It estimates the amount of pollution that is happening. So this is done by Ministry of Earth Science, who is giving all the approvals, showing the exploration of minerals in the sea, seabed mining, everything is done by him. He does all the activities. He's one, and he supports all the oil-based industries. Now they are also doing this beach cleaning, marine littering, and all this work. So they use the word addressing the marine littering for sustainable blue economy. Blue economy is all tourism and the problem here is that due to this plastic litters in the ocean, it is not affecting that. It is showing that it is affecting the aquatic animals, but the tourism industry is going down. That's what they say. To bring back the tourism industries, again we have to litter plastics, clean beaches. Who is doing this? Coast Guard, Navy has appointments to clean all the beaches by NCC people. It's happening. And it comes under Swachh Bharat, whatever Bharat they have, all the Bharat are inside into it, cleaning everything. The G20, they are showing that we have littered this much ocean by the Ministry of Earth Science, and they said that we need healthy oceans. So our turn is that yes, you need healthy oceans. for wealthy blue economy. I have seen in my house we have goats to sacrifice. Sometimes they used to sacrifice goats, no? The religious mode they used to sacrifice goats. So these goats will be given badam, pistam, and everything to grow healthy because we are going to eat it. So when they use this word plastics and a healthy ocean, because they are going to rent it for a wealthy blue economy out of. It is like that. It's a butcher's goat which is going to be cut. But all the blame comes on fishers who are using ghost nets, fishing gears when it talks about marine litter. So who is doing this and who are in these debates? Ministry of Earth Science. Today there is ongoing. There is a corporate of parties are going on, which is called climate conferences (COP). It's a corporate of parties. They all sit there. Oil and gas industries are inside. They will say all the things, but how does plastic? Because these are the people. The the entire world is under them. Corporates who are the polluters, who are the violators, and who are the lawmakers. And we are going to come with certain treaties and solutions and waiting for their laws to govern them. So, or clean the ocean is still the negotiations are like that. The people who are suffering are waiting for these treaties. No, we should have our own certain things and a certain law or something. It should be driven from the people. But it is entire. It's a web of capitalists and the corporates who are doing all these things. So this is how I see this plastic lobby or the petrochemical lobby, and it's a clear evidence of how it has been come into fishing gear nets, as I said, through policies, through plan for the past 15 years, and how we are blamed back using ghost nets or illegal nets. So thank you for this opportunities, and thank you for giving the platform for the fisher peoples. Thank you.
Is the Ministry of Environment, Forest, Climate Change is currently working on making amends to the Solid Waste Management Rules 2016. When we talk in terms of plastic, I do not think that the Plastic Waste Management Rules 2016 are going to be amended because we've had the most recent amendment on the 30th of October this year, which means not about a month ago. So, and most of these amendments were kind of focused around EPR or maybe some minor changes to the EPR policy. So I don't think that we have any plans to kind of amend the policy around plastics, but yeah, we are working on amending our solid waste management rules.
So for now, solid waste management, but maybe after INC 4 and the general election, there could be in plastic waste also. The rate at which we have amended in the past, if that continues.
Yeah, but now it will be a very difficult, task to amend these rules, scrap all of it, and then I doubt that this is going to happen, and that's also one of the reasons that India, when the delegation from India, they keep saying that we are at the forefront of environment, and we've done this and we've done that. We've already banned SUP, so we've already done EPR, right? And they don't want their workload to increase, and that's why they're saying let it be national, because if it goes international, then there are bound to be changes, right? So and I also was told by some of the people who are maybe also on this call that EPR, possibly the ministry is not looking at making any amendments right now. And because EPR is a part of the 2016 rules, I also believe that they're not planning to touch it anytime soon. But maybe after the we have the final text, maybe then the government might want to think about it.
Right. Thank you. So Mercy has asked, why are shopkeepers, street vendors, and fishers blamed for plastic pollution? I think that is a question that some of the panelists also asked. So Swati or Siddharth, either of you wants to take a jab at answering that, even though it sounds a little bit rhetorical, but still, if you want to respond.
See, I think there is a challenge at even the administrative and governance level if we actually, and this is like as a part of CSE, we have trainings where we basically invite cities, officials from Indian cities to kind of discuss about various issues. One of the issues that we have come across is uh, the urban local body, or the municipal corporation or the council or whatever. They do not really have the authority to go to the the manufacturing plant or the plant that is producing plastic, uh, such as carry bags or straws, or the urban local bodies do not have that authority. So the only authority that the urban local body has is to maybe fine a citizen, maybe fine a mall, a hospital, a school, or the retailer. So if you look at all of these stakeholders, they always go for the one that is the most vulnerable, right? Because a street vendor or a retailer may not be able to always, push back the way a mall owner or a theater owner or a school owner can, right? So you've never heard that a school is being raided for looking at how much plastic, or a plastic or a hospital was being raided to look at what kind of single use plastics were used in the hospital. But this is kind of the most vulnerable, easiest for collection of challans, and that's why these are also the people who also suffer the most. That's my understanding of this particular issue. While if you go a level up from the city government to the state government, you also see that state governments are not doing enough. There have been enough reports on how the state pollution control boards are actually acting like hand in gloves with some small industry, maybe a recycling industry is already doing, like one of the news that came out probably a couple of months ago is state pollution control boards have authorized uh, plastic waste recyclers, and they've given them capacities that they are nowhere close to actually processing that capacity. So I, if I can go on record to say that the state is the state pollution control board is actually where a lot of corruption happens, and it's not a hidden fact. There have been reports from the National Green Tribunal which have kind of put these things out in the public domain. But we do not see a lot of action happening from state pollution control boards. I also have some friends in SPCBs, and they just they say that we do not have enough bandwidth, we do not have enough people to uh, you know uh, live up to your expectations, if that's the way you put it. So yeah, that's my understanding.
What do you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to say that, I mean, I don't want to give too much of take too much time when I first spoke, but I mean, just connecting what's happening in the climate COP, and thanks for calling that the corporate parties, June. It's literally that only, and the global plastics treaty. So we have the Ratnagiri refinery coming up in Ratnagiri in Maharashtra. Hopefully not coming up, but being planned at least, which has 3 oil PSUs. The biggest oil public sector undertakings of India have come together with a joint venture. Who's funding it? It's a Saudi Aramco, which is a Saudi Arabia, petrochemical company, and then ADNOC, which is very famous today. If anyone didn't know of ADNOC, now they will all know of ADNOC. And together, these two will be holding 49% of RRPCL share. Now we're talking of very, very big money over here, and we're talking of Reliance and Adani, already over here on the one hand. So obviously they are not going to, it's the perpetrators who are actually, holding the space today. Like the pollution perpetrators are there. So obviously they are not going to be penalized. It will be the informal sector. So street vendors, waste pickers will be, I mean, their livelihoods are affected, I mean, well, waste pickers are dependent in that sense on, or are the large, I mean, plastic is a big part of what they collect. And they're also going to be, affected. Now, or, fish workers who have unions, but still they are not formal moneyed class of people. So there is a very clear class and linked caste question, over here. The other thing is that if we have to see who is the creator, like, Joan said, who's putting the fishing nets. And Norway is co-chairing the High Ambition Coalition, by the way, but they're also a big oil producing country. I mean, it's dystopian almost, but also coming to this point of who's creating the demand. If you we looked at the PVC industry and consumption in India, and we see that all government schemes put together, and this is data that has been put out by Plast India Foundation, which is a plastics lobby. According to their data, 20% of PVC demand comes from these schemes. Whether it is the toilet doors, whether it is the pipes, various things. I mean, we can share the data. But 20% of PVC demand is coming from the government schemes. It's not coming from people like, you and me. And then the government says that we don't produce enough PVC. We are dependent on imports. So let's produce more PVC. And let's, therefore set up a coal to PVC plant, which is the most polluting form of PVC, which is also anyway considered the dirtiest plastic. So as an outcome of coal to PVC, you will have mercury as a residue. We have signed the Minamata Convention, right? And there's asbestos as a residue. Now, why is obviously Adani is not going to be pulled up, right? So there is class, there is caste, there is the capitalist, government, which is really, which is pushing all this. So obviously they're not going to penalize their own folks. They are going to find, Balika Bakras, and then the communities who are the worst off or the most precariously living their lives are the ones who are the most, affected as well. And to your question, I mean, about possible stopping using plastic, I don't know. We've got, in our opinion, we've got to apply something called Minamata Convention came up with this thing called the essentiality rule or the essentiality clause. How do you define whether something is essential or not? And it's actually a very useful, convention and definition to look at. And by defining essentiality, they also define non-essentiality. And I think that is the principle we would have to apply to all forms of plastics to see whether something's essential or not. And when we mean essential, it's not just the dictionary meaning. There are three elements, to that definition. And then by applying that, one can possibly see, what is the way out of here.
So just to add to what both Siddharth and you mentioned about targeting the vulnerable group, I think it's also a matter of creating narrative. And the narrative, the industry, the Changing Markets report that came out 2 years back very clearly showed that the industry wants to build narratives that allows them to get away with whatever they are doing. And so by blaming somebody else and creating the narrative that it is the fishers, it is the street vendors, it is all these groups that are creating the plastic pollution and not us, allows them to get scot-free and continue to produce the plastic. And then the government also supports that narrative by banning certain kinds of plastic that street vendors use or some of the other groups use. So I think that's an important reason why certain communities get blamed for these pollutions. There's a question from Malti asking about. Sorry, Jones. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, sorry, why the blame on fishers is that it is because of the power, because these are marginalized people. It has been misdone. So, whatever it is, the red sandalwood or the sandalwood, which has been exported a lot, but the real attack is on the tribals who have been accused. It's the same everywhere. But I want to share here when Mercy was also asking about can we avoid plastics. So I want to share an interesting two things. One thing is that after this plastic littering started, if you go to the Adidas shoes and everything or Casio watches, there is ocean plastic recycled watches, which is more costly than the others. We are having plastic shoes, we are having plastic watches. I don't know, because Casio is one of the ocean blue watches, if you see. So that is another market which is booming out of this. There are many corporates through conservation funds. Today we call it as 30% of the ocean. Ocean littering is also become a business. And this littering is also becoming business for the other corporate parties. That's what I said. It's corporate of parties. Second thing, I will share you one incident which I saw in the market of our fishing market. where the usually women will be more in the fish markets. You can see the headload women vendors will be in the markets. Everybody knows that. So when I was buying the fish, immediately this municipality people came and said that we should not use plastics, and they started grabbing the black plastics from the. So we as certain people from the youth, we said that how can you do this? And we started shouting, and there was a tussle between them and the police was also there. It happened 3 years before. It's very near market to my house. I usually buy from one of the women. So literally, this woman, what he did, conversation was going. One person wants fish, was standing. She cut the fish in anger because his plastic has got plastic bags. She took it in hand and gave him in hand. He said, "Then how can I get this shit?" Go and say to the municipal person, "Can you carry this in your hand? I can use only plastics. Can you clothes and everything you can think of paper bags and other things. But when it comes to the fish or a meat, usually my father in his days he carries this two kuchati, we say no, the silver vessel to buy all these things. I have carried this to buy hot waters, hot milk, and everything in my childhoods. I have carried glass bottles to buy oil, but nowadays it is not there. So it's a behavioral change we have to be. But the women who aggressively done this, immediately the municipality put all the plastics and went because the entire market is being screwed because they can't sell the fish that day, and these are daily vendors. So when you say ban plastics or use this much plastics and the microns in the plastics, whatever it is, it will not reach that people. So in what language you are going to disseminate this? In what language a common person like a women vendor can understand which plastic I can use, which plastic I cannot use? The same, I was in Chennai one day, and the second day I was after the plastic ban has come in Chennai. I went to a shop and I got a recycled plastic bag. It can be recycled from Sankita hotel, the food hotel. How plastics can recycle? It's the same plastic bag. It is light green in color, but it has recycled. So see how the immediately the corporate industry changed out. The recycled plastics they try to give to you, not a paper bag. It's a recycled plastic bag, polymer plastic bags. So we have to think of this. So how to take to the common like hawker or the common vendors, because imagine if you cut a fish and buy, you can buy in hand. Or nowadays you will not take a chukuchiti also because your status is there. You can't buy a vessel and take a bag and go. So this is how. So the solution should come from people and the civil societies. It's a behavioral change. When you talk about no plastics and other things, how are we going to take out in this era of 2023? That has to be discussed more.
I think that's an important point, and it takes us back to Jay when he was mentioning about reuse and promoting reuse. So Jay, you had your hand up.
Yeah,
Want to
just
share
for that,
further?
I just wanted to point that out that what Jones sir is saying that we were actually doing reuse earlier. We were carrying our dabbas. I guess that's what he's mentioning to get the meat. We were carrying different things. We were completely used to the lifestyle without plastic. Then these people, just like he said, pehle, they only sold the net. They sold us these things, and now they are saying don't use it. So they changed the consumer behavior, and now they are saying don't use it. That's fine, but they don't want to invest in again changing the consumer behavior back to reuse. Why? They are responsible for it. So this is exactly our point, that you are responsible for this whatever raita that you have fell out, that this plastic problem, and then you are responsible to now invest in the alternative to the extent that we would ask companies to pay for the reuse, and the government to pay for the reuse infrastructure, to create an infrastructure which actually is very nice. Because if you have that dabba, you are buying local, which is a climate issue as well. So we're buying local. And one more thing I wanted to address was that what Swati was saying, that they're not really interested in the solution. It is quite evident from their action to go after fisher folk, to go after street vendors, to go after small players, because what they're doing is catching the plastic products at consumer time. Is like you got a whole sack of rice fell out in the entire city, and then are going to find 111 rice who is doing this, but you're not catching the producer who is making these bags. For that you have great excuses, that we cannot monitor this product actually. When we have asked, they have said this product poly whatever is used in other things also. So we have sold the barrels for other requirement. If somebody industry is cheating and making these plastic bags, we cannot monitor. You can monitor. Go to the street vendor, ask him where did he get the street bag from, the plastic bag from. He will give you the vendor's name. Go follow that chain. But they wouldn't follow that change. So it clearly, their actions show that they wanted to only make a show of not really do these things, but say we are doing the plastic ban, and then in that case also create new products. Because in terms of plastic, recycling plastic also, I want to say Reliance has invested in recycling the plastic PET bottles. वो ले जाते हैं हमारे पास से स्ट्रीट वेंडर से, वो भरवा मतलब द वेस्ट पिकर ओनली कलेक्ट एंड देन वो दे टेक इट, then we give it to Reliance, and then Reliance makes t-shirts and polymer stuff out of it, like the fabric that they make for polyester t-shirts, and then they give it to our cricket teams who are playing the um, sponsoring, and then they've said this is an eco-friendly polyester t-shirt. So that is what is going on. It's quite ironic, it's quite funny at times as well, but it's quite absolutely bullshit on the whole system.
So Malti and Maju seem to have a similar question, or yeah, CSA, about what is now next in the INC or the GPT process. How can we influence it? Whose voices are being heard? Is there any hope for, course correction? Swati and Siddharth, any one of you can go first, but I would like to hear from both of you.
I can go with this one. I think what is first very important is for the media to be involved and report on the Global Plastics Treaty. It's just not being reported in India. And the few very tokenistic kind of reporting that comes from is usually just, some government of India issued kind of thing to the press, and there's a very pro delegation kind of reporting. So there's really no critical reporting, and there is a bit of there is impunity, there is a sense of non-accountability, asking the tough questions, So I think media will play a very, very big role in the coming year as we go into the more serious parts of the negotiation, that they're being watched, that people are writing about them. It's bad enough that these treaties don't get discussed in the parliament. What is India's position is not reported back in the parliament, and that democratic institution is not involved at all in this. So the media needs to talk about it so that the opposition parties and others can also know more about it. I mean, we'll do what we do, but I think that's extremely important. The other is to bring back science. I don't think there's any science right now being talked of in India, at least. For example, what happens when you use PFAS, the kind of health impacts it has, that it affects, male fertility, for example. It is quite likely that the government would like to dismiss this kind of science, but I think scientific temper has to be brought back. We have to bring back, how PVC is a problem. Why is it the dirtiest plastic? Why is it that countries are actually starting to move away and in fact ban the use of PVC across all sectors? So going to the health impacts, looking at health impacts and looking at the science, in my opinion, is very important. It might seem very bleak because it's not like this government is very scientific or oriented. It does not have a scientific mind, but really we can't also become like them. So for me, media is very important to let the government know that they are being watched and they can't get away with just about anything. And science for me is also extremely crucial to really appeal to hopefully a left, the remaining part of India, which is possibly still rational and logical and scientific in orientation. For me, these two are very immediate needs, and while they might dismiss or discount the evidence, they can't not listen to the evidence. So it will be more difficult for them to push back on a scientist who goes versus us possibly. But so I feel like there is some hope in both these places. And in terms of the voices being heard, uh, the waste pickers' voices are heard very, very much. That's also because they're very organized. Uh, they organize themselves very well. They're prepared. They have the conversations. There is a solidarity network of member states. We hear often waste picker submissions being, kind of endorsed by member states, and I think that's very inspirational and something we all need to learn from. There need to be more frontline communities affected by petrochemical industry in the global north are far more organized, and they come and they are also heard quite a bit. But of course, none of the petchem countries would want to hear them, but otherwise they're absolutely heard. What's missing is really the farmers, the fish workers, and street vendors, in my opinion, there. And we really need to see how they can also reach the, treaty and present their own voice there.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with Swati. I think this media and science, I think, cannot really be, ignored. And it's unfortunate that this issue is not being reported in the country as much as it should be. But we are also trying our best to kind of bring it to at least the mainstream, if not the mainstream media, at least some substantial, bigger players. Apart from the two things that Swati mentioned, I also would like to point out uh, the most important stakeholder here is the industry itself, right? Because we did uh, witness that there's a lot of overlap in what the industry talks in an informal discussion with people like us, and the interventions that are made by the delegates that are representing India. So it's a very big overlap that we see there, right? So I think and if there is a channel to engage with the government, I think that's something that can be done. But also we understand that a lot of opinion building in the governments is happening through the knowledge that flows from the industry, right? And then if you look at it, industry is not just one person, right? When we say industry, the plastic industry, it's not just one person or one company or one entity that we're talking about. It's probably so many chota players, and then maybe a handful of big players, and there are then distributors, there are converters. The converter who is buying polymers from let's say a bigger company and manufacturing a packaging product for a brand owner will not know the chemicals that uh, the polymer manufacturer has used, and the brand owner will not know the kind of adhesives that the converter has used, right? So it's not just one person that we are talking about, which we need to understand very clearly. And there is I spent some time uh, talking to people from the industry who are from a scientific background, and i I felt that there was a lot of common ground, that eventually if you get into a discussion that is meaningful, when the other side is willing to listen to you, and when you are also willing to listen with an open mind, I think that's very important. But we have to engage the industry. This process will not go as planned if we do not try and engage the people who are putting this in the first place. So that's I think very important. I don't know how doable it is, but we can't just steer clear from the fact that there is a stakeholder who is responsible for all of this, and let's just not engage with them. Let's just do our own thing. That's I think not going to work in anyone's favor. So I think involving the industry in this discussion, telling them what the problem is uh, in terms of both societal science and also the process itself, I think that's also very important.
Thank you, Siddharth. I think that's an important point. What perhaps civil society lacks is the platforms or forum where we can engage with the industry. That's usually missing. So if those come to mind, I'm sure more civil society would like to engage with the industry and the government. Nowadays, even the government's doors are closed to a lot of civil society organizations.
Yes.
Earlier, the doors were much more open, and there was at least an attempt to engage with civil society to understand what this side of the story is. I'm looking at the clock, and I think we are about. We had initially planned for 90 minutes, and we are above time for by a good 20 minutes. So, I don't see any more questions in the chat. There was one which Swati responded.
There's one on
in the chat.
pyrolysis. Perhaps Siddharth, would you like to quickly respond to that?
So yeah, basically, from what my understanding is, we do have a few plants in the country. All these plants are small scale plants. From what I understand, they're not really bigger plants which can take huge quantities of single use plastic, or for that matter any other plastic. The other fact is that they are very small in number and they're scattered across the country. So even if you have such a technology, the cost of collection and then transportation to such specialized facilities, that is also something that you have to consider. And the third is, the market for it. When you try and make oil from such a process, it's also important that you find buyers for that oil within a certain radius, because again, if you want to transport it, let's say 200 kilometers away from where you are producing it, it may not be economically viable. So that's also something that we have to. So in terms of economics of supply and demand, right, for the product that we are making, the second point that I want to put forth is most of these processes which are patented have done their pilots mostly on a very clean piece of plastic which does not or did not bear the brunt of use, discard, and then being collected and brought back to a facility. So the numbers that are claimed by these facilities, let's say if someone is claiming that if you put in, let's say 100 kg of oil, 100 kg of plastic waste, you get 50% of oil, right? So that mass balance would hold true when you are feeding the system with the kind of plastic that was tested in the lab itself, right? And this brings me back to my point that when usually when pilots or lab runs are done, they use particularly cleaner plastics and not the ones that are contaminated, like the ones in our waste management system. So that's my second point. And the last is about the health hazard and the emissions from such plants, which also needs to be considered. There's not enough studies, not enough data to prove that these kind of technologies are safe for in terms of both the emissions and in terms of the end product itself, because the end product is oil, so you're also going to burn it. So what kind of emissions will come out from the oil itself once you burn it is something that also needs to be considered, and there's not enough data around.
I would just like to add one thing to that very useful feedback from Siddharth, is that if you use oil to make plastic and then you make oil back from that plastic, you will have certain losses in that process, because finally plastic is being made from oil. So it's nature's law of conservation that if you have to make a change, you have to spend energy, you have to spend some effort, and that energy comes out as, like you said, environment degradation. It also comes out as greenhouse gases, and there will be emissions linked to that. So it's never useful to make the plastic in the first place from that oil. If you need to use the oil, use it directly. If you don't need to use preferably don't use the oil, keep it in the ground. That's what I would say. Yeah, so as I was saying, we are on the clock now, beyond by 25 minutes. So I would just quickly like to thank all our speakers. Thank you for sharing all the details and informing us about the GPT process, about how it's impacting our communities in India, and what we could potentially do to engage and still do course correction while there are 2 INCs still to go. I also like to thank all the participants who took the time to be here and engage with us with all the questions, which pushed us to think further and respond. So thank you, everybody, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.